Welcome students to part 2 of support tutorial 7. This will cover the production function, and then in fact there will be a part 3 that will cover our costs. Otherwise it just takes too long for each of the separate parts. All right, we're at the end of part 1. We introduced you very briefly to the production function, and that's where we continue from now. In the context of economics, production is a very simple process. It is simply that we take inputs, they go through some form of transformation, and we turn them into outputs. We don't get involved in how complicated that transformation might be. We're just interested in the input and the final output. And that's why we illustrate it like something like that. Inputs, transformation, output. You need to be aware, as we've said before in economics, that inputs are resources which are known in economics as factors of production. So that is your land, your labor, your capital, your entrepreneurship. They can be fixed or variable, particularly when we're looking in the short run. In the long run, they are all variable. We'll look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. You need to understand that the state of technology for any given production function is given. That is an important assumption that is made. Remember, all assumptions must be learned. And then being able to differentiate between the short run and the long run. So let's look at what those differences are. The short run is a period during which at least one input is fixed. At least one. So at least one of land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship is fixed. That means it's the short run. We'll talk more about that in a moment. The long run, all my inputs, all my land, my labor, my capital, my entrepreneurship is all variable. I then ask the question, what is the significance of time for these concepts? And the idea is that you must be able to tell me there is no time concept in your short run and your long run. Because for every industry and every firm, the timing will be different. It all depends what is the fixed factor of production. All right. Once again, we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a moment. All right, you've got to be able to describe the production function. Pretty much not much different to what I've already told you. So it says relationship between quantity of inputs and the maximum output that can be obtained from these inputs with a given state of technology. Pretty much what we said in shorthand on the previous slide. All right. And then back to our short run in economic theory. At least one factor of production or input is fixed. Now let's look at examples. For example, if you were a farmer, the size of your farm is fixed in the short run. However, in the long run, you can sell that farm and buy a bigger farm or a smaller farm. You could buy or rent the land from a farmer next door to you. You have ways to be able to change how much land you actually have, but it's not immediate. So that's what we mean when we say at least one factor is fixed. For example, in your case, it would have been the land. But now let's pretend you're not a farmer, but you're a manufacturer of some small good or some small product in a factory in Johannesburg. What does that mean? That means that the size of your factory is fixed in the short run. You can't simply change it overnight unless you are sort of a fly-by-night, in which case you pack up and go and gone next day, you're not there anymore. But mostly businesses don't run like that. We would have some sort of agreement. Either we've bought the property or we've leased it, and therefore we are tied into that until we can change it. And that would depend whether we have to sell it, whether we want to build, whether we want to get a new lease in a different property. All different factors which would impact on the short run versus the long run. I'm hoping that's given you a little bit of insight into understanding your short run and your long run. Your total product, your average product, and your marginal product. We start off with total product, TP, and we're looking at the total number of units produced by a firm. Sometimes it's referred to as Q, which is your quantity of output. Sometimes it is referred to as O for output or TO for total output. So a couple of different abbreviations that can be used, but the most common one for purposes of your syllabus is TP. And here you have your AP and your MP, your average product and your marginal product. Please notice the formula. Your average product is your total product divided by your number of workers, giving you your output per worker, whereas your marginal product is the delta TP, the change in total product, divided by delta N, change in number of workers, which gives us the addition to total output when one more worker is hired. Really important to understand both the theory and the formulae in each of these cases, ladies and gents. Please write these down now because we're going to expect you to use them to complete the next table. And here we have the production function in a schedule or table format. We now have to be able to calculate our marginal product and our average product using those equations or those formulae that I gave you on the previous slide. But before we do that, I want you to understand what you're looking at here. So first thing we do is this is short run production function. And the reason we know that it has to be short run is we look at this and we see this is the same all the way through. Number of machines, 5, 5, 5, 5, all the way down. That is our fixed input. Capital is our fixed input. We look at the number of workers and we can see that that is changing. So that is variable. Remember, short run, at least one fixed input. All the others can be variable, but there's one fixed. So our one fixed is capital, and we've got a variable, which is workers. Then we go and have a look. What is my output in my factory? All right, so if I've got no workers, then I produce nothing. And then I start hiring my workers, and then I look at what happens to my output. Well, we can see my output is increasing, increasing, increasing. It reaches a maximum, and then it starts to decrease. Now, that is the basis for a really, really important law in economics. We're going to have a look at that in a moment. But I want you to first notice, what are we looking at in terms of the maximum? We've got two possible maximum positions. We could hire 8 workers and we could hire 9 workers. Now, in order for us to work out from an economics perspective, where is the best position, we need to calculate our marginal product. And that's what you're busy doing right now. So before I go on to the solution page, you might want to pause at this point, calculate your marginal product, calculate your average product, and then we'll talk some more. Moving on to the solutions. There we go. Now let's have a look again at this marginal product. Remember, I said to you, marginal product is the addition to total product when we hire one more unit. I shouldn't say unit for worker, when we hire one more worker. So marginal product is the addition to my total product when I hire one more worker. Let's have a look at what each of our workers produces. Worker number 1, he produced 16 units. Worker number 2 manages to push it up to 28 units by him or her alone. Worker number 3 is contributing 34 units. Worker number 4, 35. Worker number 5, 32, and worker number 6, 26. What do we notice? As I hire worker number 1 and number 2 and number 3 and number 4, each worker is contributing more than the previous worker. So they are contributing more to my output. However, when I hire worker number 5, he or she is still positively contributing, but it's less than worker number 4. And worker number 6 is less than worker number 5. And worker number 7 is less than worker number 6. And what we are actually seeing playing out here, folks, is what we call the law of diminishing marginal returns. And that is probably one of the most important concepts that you will learn in your first year economics course. Super important in business, super important in life as well. It's almost the situation, too many cooks in the kitchen kind of situation. Hopefully you'll get to understand it as we go, but if you don't, please make sure that you ask someone to go through it again with you. Before we move on to the graphs, which will illustrate these relationships as well, I want you to take a look now at the table and see. Remember, we said that we could hire 8 or 9 workers because we get 200 in terms of our output in both cases. So there we see it. Now, which of those options would be the best according to economics? The best one would be to hire 9 workers because economics tells us that our total product will be at a maximum when the marginal product of a worker is 0. In other words, worker number 9 has contributed nothing to my organization, but he or she has also not decreased my output. So at that point, my output will be at a maximum. Moving on to take a quick look at the graph. The graphs tell us exactly the same information, folks. Here is our S-shaped production function. That's what it's called, an S-shaped production function, because of the law of diminishing returns or marginal returns. And then you have your relationship between your AP and your MP. Now, two important things come out of this graph. First of all, when TP is at a maximum, marginal product is at 0, which you have already learned, and that is when I hire the 9th worker. It does not pay me to hire the 10th worker because my marginal product is then going negative and my total product will start to decrease. When, however, does diminishing returns actually set in? When does it start? It in fact starts from worker number 5, because as soon as my marginal product starts to go down, it tells me that diminishing returns have set in. It is still worth hiring those people because my total product is still going up. We can see I'm still increasing my total product, but my marginal product has started to decrease. A challenge for most first-year students, ladies and gents, but as I always say, sweat it till you get it. Now we move on to costs, which is going to be part 3, so cheers until then.